This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 21st of February 2026. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with NZZ's Europe editor Niklaus Nuspliger. Then,
the thing that I really want to do is kind of break down the wall between the performer and the crowd and have something that feels like everyone is part of the show in a way.
Then we'll hear from DJ and producer Haai on collaboration, technology and how to make electronic performance feel more human and immersive. That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday. First though, the news. Iran and the United States are drifting closer to open conflict as diplomacy over Tehran's nuclear program falters, according to officials and diplomats across the Gulf and Europe. Regional states and Israel now judge confrontation more likely than compromise, with Washington amassing one of its largest Middle East force deployments since 2003. Donald Trump has announced a fresh 10% tariff on imports worldwide after the Supreme Court of the United States struck down most of his earlier trade measures in a 6-3 ruling. The move deepens uncertainty for global markets as businesses anticipate years of legal wrangling over refunds and presidential powers. And NASA is targeting early March for its first crewed mission around the moon in more than half a century, sending 4 astronauts on a 10-day Artemis II flyby. The launch window follows a successful full-fuel rehearsal, clearing a key hurdle towards future lunar landings. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm Georgina Godwin, and in the studio with me for the very first time is Niklaus Nuspliger, who is the Europe editor for the NZZ, one of Monocle's favourite publications. Niklaus, it's lovely to have you here. You need to tell us all about you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Georgina. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Well,
You're Swiss?
I'm Swiss, indeed. I do work for NZZ, which is kind of the leading Swiss newspaper. I worked as a correspondent. I was a parliament correspondent back in the days, worked out of New York as a correspondent, several years in Brussels, several years in London, most recently, and now returned to the headquarters in Zurich to become the Europe editor. I still have one leg in London, and so I took the opportunity to come by and say hi here in the studio in London.
I'm very happy that you did, and because you've come at such a busy time for you. You're actually on a book deadline now. You've written one book already. That was a Europe between populists and bureaucrats. Tell me about that.
Yes, that was in 2019, ahead of the European elections back in the day. It was a bit about the crisis of democracy in Europe. You know, on the one hand, obviously this populist threat that has increased even since then, the rise of authoritarianism in China. But then at the same time, this impression that more and more political decisions are taken out of the realm of politics. They're decided by courts, they're decided by, bureaucrats. And so that was a bit like, what is the way forward for democracy in Europe, but even, more generally in the Western world.
But right now you're on a deadline for another book.
Now I'm on a deadline for another book. It's a book 10 years after Brexit. It was commissioned by a Swiss publishing house specifically for a Swiss audience because, as you might know, Switzerland is also struggling to redefine its own relationship with the European Union. And I'm basically looking at what has happened 10 years after Brexit. Has it worked out for the UK or not? Probably not really. And what are the lessons that Switzerland can maybe draw from this experience in the UK?
Yeah, don't do it, I would say.
I can't really recommend it, indeed. I mean, obviously the situation is a bit more complicated. Switzerland tries to kind of get closer to the European Union. Brexit was a process of disintegration, but the arguments that the EU skeptics in Switzerland advance are very similar to the arguments of the Brexiteers.
Yeah. Now, talking about the courts being in charge, well, of course, we've just seen a massive blow for Donald Trump in the US courts because they have said that he really shouldn't have done what he did with tariffs. Tell us more.
It was probably the biggest blow for President Trump in his second term. I mean, the Supreme Court basically ruled that he's not allowed, that he doesn't have a legal basis to impose these tariffs that he did. We remember April 2025, this famous press conference in the Rose Garden of the White House. President Trump appeared like a head teacher with this board and imposed seemingly arbitrary tariffs.
Liberation Day.
Liberation Day.
Yeah.
And I remember also from a Swiss perspective, he announced a tariff of 39% on imports from Switzerland. And later, quite recently in Davos, he said he basically did it because the Swiss president at the time, Karin Keller-Sutter, rubbed him the wrong way. So it shows a bit there was no real foundation in law to impose these tariffs. This has now been confirmed, crucially, by the Supreme Court. And I would say it's probably a healthy sign for democracy.
Absolutely.
In the
and I mean,
United
some of
States.
those judges were in fact appointed by him.
And that also shows his reaction was very angry because I think he would have expected more loyalty for them. He said the judgment was a disgrace. He called some of these judges fools. He said they were potentially influenced by foreign interests, foreign powers. And now he is a bit in a bind. No? I mean, what is he going to do? He's now imposing 10% tariffs globally on all the countries in the world. He can only do that for a limited amount of time, 150 days, and he's probably going to find some ways to reintroduce, higher tariffs. But crucially, I don't think he won't be able to use those tariffs as a threat anymore in his foreign policy. He threatened Canada, for instance, 200% tariffs because you're now talking to the Chinese, or X amount of tariffs to the Brazilians because I don't like the Brazilian president. And I think that is now much more difficult for him to do.
Absolutely. And I mean, it was just what it's done. I mean, basically, we saw this supposed adult have a tantrum.
Right.
I mean, he just kind of, one would say, perhaps threw his toys out of the cot. And one of the reasons one of the ways this might manifest is, of course, Iran.
Well, Iran is obviously the second biggest, or a very big story now in this week. And, people, as we heard in the news, are increasingly expecting military action. And I would maybe like to draw your attention to a second story I brought in today. It's a story from the Daily Telegraph about the Chagossians.
Because it is related to Iran.
It is related It is related in a weird way to Iran, and it's a story that kind of combines the individual and micro level with the geopolitical level. We're talking about the Chagos Islands. It's a tiny group of islands in the Indian Oceans, in the middle of nowhere, so to speak. And it's part of Britain. It's the British Indian Ocean Territory. And the UK plans to give that territory back to Mauritius. Now, frankly, no one would probably care all that much about these islands if it weren't for a military base called Diego Garcia. It's a British-American military base, and Trump has made clear that he at least wanted to have the option of using that military base for a potential attack on Tehran, on Iran. And obviously, we see now this build-up of naval forces in the Mediterranean, increasing risk of conflict, and that in this geopolitical climate, we have a handful of descendants of the native people of Chagos Islands who were expelled in the 60s because Americans and British decided to build that military base, so they didn't want anyone around. And now the descendants, or 4 to 5 people from, descending from that original population from there, they return to the island on their own boats. They
2,000 miles across the Indian Ocean.
2,000 miles across the Indian Ocean. Don't ask me how they did it exactly, but they did land on a beach there. There's basically no infrastructure. They started a settlement in tents. They're looking for water. They have to fish. They also kind of, and their goal is basically they want to make sure that these territories remain British and they're not handed back to Mauritius. And there's also this incredible scene that's been described in these articles where these British officials show up on the beach. They even have tea with these Chagosians, and they hand them an eviction order and tell them, you have to leave this territory now.
And this is basically the British state evicting British citizens from British territory, right?
Yeah, exactly, from British territory, like in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So it is quite a curious story. And now, obviously, we have Donald Trump weighing in, and Donald Trump kind of becomes an ally for these Chagosians because he's also opposing the return of these islands to Mauritius because, he probably couldn't care less or probably doesn't even know about these people, but he has obviously strategic reasons because he would like to use this military base, Diego Garcia, for military action.
Yeah. So one little detail from the story that I absolutely love is that the British police who came said that they were not allowed, the Chagosians were not allowed to light fires on the beach, but they think that they're probably going to have to if they want to eat hot food. However, they are only, if they're going to do that, it would be fish caught from the sea, says this piece, rather than the gargantuan coconut crabs native to the island. Because here's the thing about coconut crabs. Apparently, they are the world's largest arthropods, and they can live for 60 years. They can lift 30 kilograms in their massive claws. They can climb trees and have legs that span 1 meter. That sounds a bit scary, huh?
That sounds a bit scary. I don't know how they're going to cohabit with these species, though. So it's definitely a story to follow.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about another kind of grasping thing, if I can make that link there to Prince Andrew. No, the man formerly known as Prince Andrew. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. This is everywhere, and I'd like to start actually by talking about the photograph, that infamous photograph. It was taken by a Reuters photographer. It was on every single front page yesterday of him looking completely and utterly shell-shocked. The photographer took 6 frames. I think a couple were out of focus. Some of them just had police in the shot. Only one had Andrew, and that was the one. Sadly, he's on staff, so he hasn't made a mint from it. But that photograph was absolutely stunning. That is going to be one of those pictures we see for years and years and years and years. The story itself just gets even worse for Andrew, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. This photograph is probably going to be, the late Queen once said, I have to be seen to be believed, which is obviously also about, pictures of her being seen in the public. But now we see this picture of Andrew. It's absolutely devastating. As you said, he just had been questioned for 12 hours in a police station. And I think up until very recently, it would have been unimaginable that the police arrest formally a high-ranking member of the royal family, question that individual in a police station. So this is unprecedented.
And they would have had they would have had the option, surely, of asking him to come in for and they didn't do that.
It does raise some questions. It did seem quite a bit performative, but nevertheless, they did it. And now, obviously, today on the front pages in the UK, we see these headlines about new consequences for former Prince Andrew. He could be removed now from the line of succession. That would require a new law that, the British government would have to bring into Parliament. And we do see now that up until now in this whole Epstein saga and in the scandal surrounding former Prince Andrew, he had to face, symbolic consequences, financial consequences, political consequences. But now we're entering into a new stage. So there's new legislation being proposed. There are legal consequences for him already. And I think this also shows that this time where the royal family was basically they were able to hide between the high walls of the palace, it's over. I think there's a new era of transparency and accountability that the British public and the British media will now ask of the royal family.
I mean, a lot of the press here is saying, is this the end of the royals? Because it's such a... I mean, not since... Charles, I think it was Charles I, wasn't it, who was beheaded, was the last person who was arrested.
Who was arrested, yeah.
And, I mean, this could be an enormous crisis for them. Could it finish them off?
I don't think it will finish them off. I mean, it's too enshrined in British society, but it will probably redefine their role. And Times wrote it's probably the biggest crisis for the monarchy since 1936, the abdication, famously. So, I mean, this says a lot already because this was a massive crisis for the royal family, and also there's the willingness now of the government to take action. Don't forget, even until recently, they blocked parliamentary questions, critical questions about Andrew, because there's this old tradition in Parliament that you're not allowed to ask, not allowed to be critical of the royal family. This seems to be changing, and it's changing quite rapidly and dramatically.
So, listen, I've just realised I know absolutely nothing about Swiss history in terms of monarchy.
Oh, we never had one. That's why you don't know anything. No, well, we had kind of the Habsburgians, which was obviously Austrian monarchs ruling over Switzerland, but that's kind of, 800 years ago, roughly. And then the founding myth of Switzerland is actually that William Tell, I don't know if you've heard, it's also a famous play by Schiller. Yeah. So he
and the overture, of course.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And so he basically kind of, shot the representative of the Habsburgian Empire in Switzerland, and then that was kind of the Swiss Liberation Day, so to speak. So we were kind of Switzerland. You couldn't find a more republican country probably than Switzerland.
That's extraordinary. I had no idea about that. How fascinating! And tell me, you're now here in London, but you're straddling both worlds, right?
I am. So, I was actually once invited to the garden party in Buckingham Palace. It was probably the highlight of my social calendar. Which was also quite interesting for me as a Swiss, republic. Because honestly, in Switzerland, even our political system is designed in a way we don't like anyone to have too much power. We have a rotating presidency. Yeah. So each year, a new member of the government assumes the presidency. And so there I was in Buckingham Palace. It was obviously raining.
Of course.
Of course it was. And I thought, oh, now I have achieved, like everything. I'm invited to Buckingham Palace in the garden. But then I realized there's obviously also a two-class system at that party, because there's the royal tent where the actual VIPs are going to have tea with the royals, and I was only in the commoners' tent.
Oh, man, how humiliating.
Humiliating. It was still an interesting experience, wasn't it?
Did you get to meet any of them?
I did. I saw them, but I wasn't formally introduced, let's say. Yes.
So I've met Charles a couple of times.
Really?
He was quite involved. He was interested in Zimbabwe and our sort of fight for democracy and so on. But I also met Diana, and it was kind of hilarious because it was at a reception for, I think, Save the Children or something. And this happened in Zimbabwe, and I used to do a bit for the charity. I was on television there and used to, sort of front stuff for them. And so her PR people, or the PR people for Save the Children, came round this sort of big reception room and introduced me to her and said, this is Georgina. She's done such lovely work for the charity. And she sort of looked me in the eye. I felt really seen, right? Grasped my hand really strongly, and she said, "Thank you for all of the work you do for us." And I was just beyond thrilled. I moved on, so did she.
Right.
And then the whole kind of circus kind of revolves around the room until they catch up with me again. Only now her minders have changed. She's got a different person introducing her. And they come to me and they go, "Princess Diana, this is Georgina. She's done a lot for them." She grabs my hand, she looks me in the eye, and she says, "Georgina, thank you so much for all you've done."
But you think she did remember you?
No, of course she didn't. Of course she didn't. Right. And the thing was, she was so sincere both times. It was kind of lovely in a way. I just loved her sort of, just her, how she was just trying to be as genuine as she could. Of course, she couldn't possibly remember the 100th person she'd been introduced to within half an hour. But
Georgina, not everyone gets introduced to, a member of the royal family twice. So that's also an honour for you, isn't it?
Twice in half an hour.
Half an hour. Probably a record.
Okay, let's meet a DJ. Making her name on the electronic music scene, few artists can claim to be as experimental and genre-blending as the DJ and producer Haai. Her latest album, Humanize, released in October, explores themes around what it means to be human in a digital age. She caught up with Monocle's Tom Webb ahead of her show at Milan's Voce Club to give a little preview of what she might do next.
The past 24 hours, I was in Copenhagen last night. I played 4 hours in a club beneath a theatre. It was really cool. It was -10, super snowy, and I just enjoyed this party so much. The person playing before me was playing like very fast, so I just played like a lot of like techno that I don't often get to play. Yeah, definitely like genre hopped, but yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Can you describe the two vibes, or are you going to get in trouble from tonight and yesterday?
No, easily. So last night was like an underground, like very the archetypal like underground kind of club, very dark, cages, like maybe like 400 capacity, super queer. And tonight is like audiophile kind of sound in a museum, like opposite ends of an experience, but both sort of like of equal importance, I think.
That's what we love on Monocle Radio. Good sound, which is why we're here. Can you try and tell us your year so far, 2026? It
Yes.
probably already feels like a very long year for you. How did it start? I think with a mammoth set, and where did it go from there?
Yeah, so it began with like a revisit to my old home of Phonox. I played 10 hours. And then I actually took a holiday for the first time in 8 years after that. So I had a little break in Mexico and then played a show with Fred. Played Foreign with Fred and Romy, and it was the first time we'd performed Lights Out with Romy singing, ever. So it was kind of like a good like long set holiday straight back into the belly of the beast.
How is that collaboration for you? How important is it, and what it's like working together?
I feel like that collaboration really kicked off me working with other people. I was always very like sort of quite protective of how I worked, I think, and I feel like everyone in their studio is like has their own process. But I think working with Fred and Romy, they're such like dear friends as well. I feel like it really set me up for understanding how I work best in like collaborative kind of situations.
So that takes us nicely to your second album, Humanize. Big collaborations on there. Can you talk us through some of them?
For sure. So I felt like it was a real callback from even the previous album, but I had my dear friend John Hopkins, Alexis Taylor, Cambu, Obi Frankie. I worked with Trans Voices Choir. I also worked with another gospel choir, which was led by Wendy Rose, Caden Ford, James Messiah, one of my favourite poets, just absolute living legend, I think. I co-produced the whole thing. It was actually my first time co-producing something with another person, which was truly like just such an amazing like learning experience. But yeah, a dear friend of mine, Pat Alvarez, who is a super, super talented producer.
Can you talk us through the title, the message of the album?
Yes.
What is Humanize?
I guess it's sort of speaking to the world that we're living in that is so, I guess, like trying to keep up with like machine learning, AI, like it was really important for me to make this feel really human. So I think working with like loads of voices, and it was almost like a play between, so I lent into machines that I use to kind of like emulate the idea of like technology, and then I use my own voice a lot, which I really loved. And like, yeah, just like kind of like telling my own story, which I feel like is like the most kind of human thing you can do, is like talk about your like lived experiences. Yeah, and working with like Trans Voices Choir was just such and Illa, who's one of the choir founders. We'd worked together before, but yeah, it was really like just a really like life-changing experience, to be honest. And just getting to work. John Hopkins and I, we've been dear friends for a long time, but we've collaborated like many times, and he's kind of like my sort of friend that I can call up if I'm stuck on an idea, and Like, I mean, I've done it this week. We sort of lean on each other for like different things, which is really, it's just nice to have that kind of relationship with someone where you feel like really comfortable to just be like, please help.
You take on very different, exciting projects. The Albert Hall looks incredible.
Yes.
Are you constantly trying to evolve and diversify?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like this year in particular, like I've like had this real like burning desire to, almost like an unquenchable kind of thirst for this kind of ambition with the live show that I want to do. That's like, I want something that's like really immersive. I mean, I feel like this is kind of the first step into that world, but the sort of like future plans for this show is for the thing that I really want to do is like kind of break down the wall between the performer and the crowd and have something that feels like everyone is like part of the show in a way. I've been like journaling about this for so long, and I think this year we'll get a chance. I'm doing it like a big project this year that hopefully will allow us to, the first kind of idea of that vision to be like possible. So I feel like it's something that would like develop over time.
Final question for you. You're Australian, you're European now.
Yes.
Based in Europe. How is Europe as a base, and what's it like to tour?
I mean, it's great. I've lived in London for 15 years. I mean, I love going back home, and I obviously miss the sunshine and the beaches and all the rest. But for how much I get to travel, and, you know, for instance, us even being here, and, you know, I get to have my partner here as well, and I feel like it's a really sort of like lucky place to be.
That was DJ and producer Haai speaking to Monocle's Tom Webb, and the latest album, Humanise, is out now. Well, talking about humanising, let's talk about some non-human things, because in your paper, the NZZ, there's a big article about the Chinese New Year show. Of course, we're just celebrating the beginning of the year of the fire horse, but how it was marked with robots and AI, so about as far away from humanising as you can get.
Yes, indeed. This is a wonderful article by my colleague Katrin Büchenbacher at Neue Zürcher Zeitung, and she has been watching on Chinese New Year's Eve this big TV gala on the Chinese state broadcaster CCTV. And this is basically the Chinese version of the American Super Bowl. So everyone is watching it. Apparently like 80% of the TV viewers are tuning in. People are having, dinner at home and eating all kinds of food and watching TV in the background or more actively. And it's also increasingly used to showcase, Chinese leading position in technology, artificial intelligence, humanoid robots, and so on and so forth. And there's this wonderful scene that was on the show of this Chinese grandmother. She was on the stage with her ungrateful grandson who didn't prepare a gift for his poor grandmother for Chinese New Year. But don't despair. You have this grandmother has like 4 humanoid robots who come on the stage. So she has new grandchildren. They're much more grateful and they're very talented. They can break dance, do kung fu, they can talk and speak like humans. And also their movements are much more natural than they used to be in recent years. So they're becoming increasingly human. They're almost humanized, so to speak. And it's obviously the big question is, on an industrial basis, are these robots going to be able to replace humans in factories, for instance? I mean, obviously, there's a question of artificial intelligence. Are they going to be able to replace us as radio hosts and journalists? Hopefully not too soon. But there's an encouraging sign, because many people, on Chinese social media criticize the show because they said it's less and less funny. It's becoming just this showcase of Chinese technologies. And apparently the big problem is that these robots, they lack the sense of humor. So there's still kind of something, human missing.
In these that's the thing,
robots.
Isn't it? There's very little humor, it seems to be, in any kind of AI. But you're talking about, will they replace humans? Maybe they have already from other planets. Let's talk about aliens quickly before we go.
This is a potentially even more consequential story than the Epstein files, because Donald Trump has ordered the Defense Department and any other American agency to publish all files they might have on extraterrestrial life.
Now, this comes out directly out of something Barack Obama said really not very seriously at all.
Well, he was on a podcast, Barack Obama, and he said about aliens, they are real, but I haven't seen them. And so he basically said, that that there was no underground facility where the American government kept them. But in any case, these comments went viral, and then it became a big media story as well. And
Trump says that he leaked an official secret by saying that.
Apparently, exactly. He says he accused Barack Obama of disclosing classified information, and he even suggested I might get him out of trouble by declassifying it. So it is an interesting position to take. Remains to be seen if these files are published or not, and crucially, what is in it.
Well, and what a distraction from the Epstein files, right?
Absolutely.
You've got this huge dump of all the Epstein stuff which implicates Trump, and suddenly here's all this stuff about UFOs. What are we going to be watching? It's the UFO stuff, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So let's see where it all leads. Maybe he will also find some android, some kind of humanoid robots instead of aliens. Who knows?
Perhaps we could shove a couple of royals in there too, and just to make this
to make an interesting mix.
Niklaus, it's been lovely having you with us. Thank you very much indeed. That's all for Monocle on Saturday. My guest, Niklaus Nuspliger, and our producer and studio engineer, Mariella Bevan. Thanks to you both. And the show, Monocle on Saturday, will return at the same time next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.